The emergency bay aboard the Mirai Station was a chaos of blinking lights, foreign instruments, and the shrill, high-pitched alarms that sounded nothing like their Earth equivalents. Dr. Lorne Sayer had been on board for less than 36 hours, and he was already elbow-deep in an alien trauma suite where nothing was labeled in English and half the tools looked like kitchen utensils from a warped dimension. "What's the status?" Lorne asked, tugging on a sterile smock that clung to his arms like cling film. The alien nurse, if Lorne interpreted the uniform and panicked eyes correctly, spoke in a clipped, modulated tone. "Subject Jalin, species Varnak. Blunt thoracic trauma, oxygen saturation declining, internal fluid leakage in 3 compartments. We do not possess the experience for this injury pattern. We have called 7 specialists. None have responded in time." Lorne stepped closer. The Varnak patient lay on a biosuspension platform, its translucent skin pulsing a dull blue. The area around its central cavity, perhaps analogous to a chest, was caved in, and a thick, translucent fluid pooled beneath it. One of the alien surgeons, a tall, bioluminescent lifeform with jointed limbs, flared its neck fronds in distress. "We cannot stop the pooling. Every sealant fails. The internal scaffolding may have collapsed entirely." "Okay," Lorne said, already scanning the equipment. "I need imaging cross-sectional if possible, your closest equivalent to a CT scan." The nurse hesitated. "We use pulsed matter resonance. It causes discomfort in Varnaks." "Better than dead." A moment later, the chamber flooded with a soft pink light. The display updated in real time, revealing a shattered internal structure. The support struts, some sort of organic cartilage, had snapped under compression. 2 vital nodes, pulsating like tiny hearts, were displaced and leaking. Lorne pointed. "There. That's your problem. Those nodules are bleeding into the cavity. If we don't stop it and realign the struts, he'll drown in his own fluids." "But the bone equivalents are non-regenerative," the glowing surgeon said. "We cannot replicate them. We do not know how to set them." Lorne turned to the alien, fixing him with a look that made more seasoned trauma nurses back home stand straighter. "I've fixed worse before breakfast. Get me a stabilizer frame and whatever you use for internal bonding." The room went silent, except for the soft beeping of vital monitors and the squish of fluid collection units. Lorne washed in, gloved up, and leaned over the Varnak. He worked slowly, narrating to the aliens as he went. "This is displacement of central supports. In humans, we call it a flail chest, multiple fractures in the rib cage, causing instability. The patient can't breathe properly. In your patient, it's more like a crushed scaffold. I'll realign first, then support externally." He used a pair of alien forceps, after testing their grip on his own hand, to lift and rotate the skeletal struts back into place. The Varnak twitched violently. "Sedation deeper," Lorne said. "You need to suppress reflexive twitching or I'll tear something worse." The nurse adjusted the controls and the Varnak settled. "Now this bonding resin, how long to set?" "Whole minute," the glowing surgeon said. Lorne applied the substance, which hardened into a translucent brace. He then affixed a stabilization ring around the entire cavity, something like an exoskeletal cast. "Vitals are stabilizing," the nurse said. Lorne exhaled and stepped back. His gloves were stained with the Varnak's fluid and his arms ached. "Keep him under observation. If pressure builds in the cavity, you'll need to drain it. Use a negative pressure draw, not suction. Suction will collapse the cavity." The glowing surgeon approached. You realigned the structural cage without imaging guidance. You predicted the tissue rebound from tactile feedback." "That's called palpation," Lorne said, pulling off his gloves. "We do it on Earth when we don't have imaging or time. You learn to feel what's wrong, literally." The alien blinked slowly. This was not a standard technique, it was improvisation. "Welcome to trauma surgery," Lorne replied. He left the bay 30 minutes later, his scrubs soaked and his stomach rumbling. He found a vending unit near the observation deck and retrieved something labeled nutrient slab that tasted like sour banana. Before he could sit, a voice behind him said, "Your presence is requested in Surgery Pod 3. Lorne turned. Another alien, this one smaller and wrapped in a polymer suit. "What happened now?" "Complication from previous procedure. Not your patient. Another Varnak. Similar injury. Your techniques are being requested. Lorne looked at his hands. They weren't shaking, but fatigue pulled at every joint. All right, let's go. Inside Pod 3, the mood was worse. The second Varnak had a deeper chest collapse. Multiple fluid sacs had already ruptured and its breathing was shallow. The previous team had attempted to mimic Lorne's technique, but had set the struts unevenly, causing a pressure differential in the cavity. Lorne studied the scene, then turned to the glowing surgeon, same one from before. You tried to replicate what I did? Yes, but the alignment failed. The bonding agent sealed misaligned struts. Okay, then we'll do it again, but first we have to remove the resin. The alien hesitated. That can damage the tissue. Not, if you're careful. He guided the alien surgeon's hands, showing how to peel the resin without tearing the surrounding membranes. He didn't rush, even though the Varnak's vitals were dropping. Once it's off, listen to the way the structure moves. It's not just about placement, it's about tension, like tuning an instrument. You'll feel when it's right. The alien nodded, hands steadying under Lorne's instruction. After 30 minutes, the struts were realigned, the cavity sealed properly, and the patient showed signs of recovery. Lorne stepped back, sweat beading on his forehead. You're getting it, he said. You don't need me next time. The alien bowed slightly, a ripple traveling across its skin. You taught more in one procedure than we have learned in cycles. I didn't teach you anything you didn't already know. You just needed a different angle. A day later, Lorne was in the station's modest gym, trying to unknot his shoulder with a resistance band, when the glowing surgeon arrived again. There's a request, he said. Not a patient, a lesson. Lorne grabbed a towel. You want a class? Something like it. 10 of them assembled in the surgical amphitheater. Lorne stood beside a projected model of the Varnak thoracic cavity. Okay, he said. Let's talk about failure, because that's where you learn the most. He walked them through the anatomy, the misalignment, and the correction. He didn't sugarcoat the risks. He emphasized tactile feedback, redundancy and stabilization, and the importance of sedation depth. They asked good questions, not about saving lives, but about understanding them. When it was over, the glowing surgeon approached him again. Will you return to Earth soon? Eventually. My rotation's only for 6 months. We'd be honored if you wrote your methods for our archives. I'll do better, Lorne said. I'll write you a protocol, step by step, and I'll include what to do when it doesn't work. The alien tilted its head. You prepare for failure? It's the only way to get better. That night, Lorne sat in the observation deck again, staring out at the star field beyond the station's hull. He had been awake for nearly 30 hours. His hands still ached. But he'd saved 2 lives, not by being better, but by being willing to try when others froze. And by breakfast tomorrow, he'd probably be in another surgical bay, fixing something worse. You're not supposed to be here without a sanitation wrap, said a voice behind Lorne, somewhere between a whisper and a chime. He didn't look up. He was standing ankle-deep in a shallow basin of antiseptic fluid, both hands submerged in a transparent nutrient gel that smelled faintly of basil and burnt ozone. The alien surgical assistants had insisted it was essential for dermal recovery after prolonged exposure to Varnak excretions. I've been elbow-deep in a species that keeps its lungs in a fluid pouch. I think I've earned a few minutes without cling wrap, Lorne replied, flexing his fingers under the gel. The voice belonged to a technician named Heren, whose species had no visible mouth and wore a visor that translated vocal impulses into audible tones. The visor blinked green. All non-sterile personnel are required to use coverings in the recovery corridor, even if they have saved 2 lives. Lorne finally glanced over. So you've been keeping count? Yes, and you've also overloaded the bioresin printer twice. I needed bracing lattice. Yours snapped under pressure. You used a food-grade polymer. Held better than your surgical one. Hearn turned slightly, a movement Lorne had learned meant either disapproval or confusion, possibly both. Commander Greeley asked me to escort you to Lecture Bay 7. The Varnak medics requested a follow-up session. Lorne pulled his hands free, shook off the gel, and wiped them on a towel that disintegrated on contact. You people really hate reusables. The towel recycles into vapor, nutrients. Of course it does. He followed Huren through 3 corridors and a vertical transport tube that rotated 90 degrees mid-ascent, depositing them in a vaulted room filled with tiered seating. The Varnaks occupied most of it, along with a few observers from other species. The room smelled faintly of copper and chalk. Commander Grelly stood near the projection node, her slim frame wrapped in a deep maroon cloak. Her species, the Zellery, had no visible joints and moved with unsettling fluidity. "We have translated your notes," she said, skipping introductions. "However, several concepts remain opaque. You describe tissue resilience thresholds as variable depending on age, hydration, and emotional state. This contradicts our assumptions." Lorne rubbed the back of his neck. "Because your models assume uniformity. Biological systems aren't engines. They don't run consistently. You can't predict how a body will respond unless you account for stress, or fear, or pain." A younger Varnak raised a tentacle. "You mean emotions affect structural integrity?" "In humans, yes, and apparently in Varnaks too. The first patient's recovery plateaued until we reduced ambient light. Overstimulation delayed healing." Murmurs rippled through the room. One of the observers, a pale-skinned being with 6 pupils, leaned forward. "So sensory input can modulate recovery?" "Exactly. You can't just fix the mechanics. You've got to consider the whole system. Hormonal levels, metabolic feedback, even social context." A Varnak at the front flexed its dorsal plates. "But that makes standardization impossible." "Not impossible, just more complicated than you thought. Medicine isn't about certainty, it's about probabilities and judgment." Graley stepped closer to the projection table and activated a 3D model of the Varnak thoracic structure. "Demonstrate the correction method you applied." "We reconstructed it, but the calibration still fails in simulation." Lorne moved to the table, tapping controls until the internal struts appeared in translucent blue. He zoomed in on the central support and highlighted 2 junction points. "You're trying to fix the whole structure at once. That's your problem. You need to anchor one end first. Otherwise, the pressure from the surrounding tissue keeps shifting everything out of alignment." Relly folded her arms. "But anchoring creates temporary asymmetry, which the body compensates for. You anchor, let the tissue adjust, then correct the secondary struts. It's like resetting a dislocated joint. You guide it in steps, not all at once." The projection flickered, then updated to show the staggered realignment. A ripple of understanding passed through the Varnaks, visible in the way their skin shifted from blue to a faint violet hue. Friend, still standing off to the side, tilted his visor slightly. "You assume biological cooperation in your models. What if the tissue resists?" Lorne shrugged. "Then you adapt. You use pressure modulation or localized cooling, or, if it's really stubborn, a pharmacological relaxant. But you don't force it." A long pause followed. Then a Varnak near the back asked, "Can you show us the pressure modulation technique?" Lorne walked over to a work table where a synthetic Varnak model had been prepared. He picked up a pair of flexible stabilizers and a fluid pressure injector. "This is low-tech compared to your gear, but it works. You apply counterpressure here parallel to the fault line, not across it. That redistributes the internal load and gives you a stable window to work." He demonstrated slowly, adjusting tension with the injector until the synthetic thoracic cavity held its shape. Curly nodded once. "We had assumed direct pressure was more effective." "Direct pressure turns collapse into rupture," Lorne said. "You're fighting the body instead of working with it." The session ran longer than expected. The Varnaks asked about post-operative care, metabolic monitoring, and even psychological stressors. Lorne answered everything, drawing diagrams, replaying footage, and, at one point, physically demonstrating a human breathing technique to illustrate pressure gradients. By the time the room emptied, nearly 2 hours had passed. Lorne's voice was hoarse and his knees ached from standing. Rayleigh stayed behind. "Your methods are disruptive," she said, watching the last of the others file out. "I'm not here to disrupt. I'm here to keep people alive." You do both. They walked back together through the corridor. Grelly moved like a shadow, silent and almost gliding. What made you choose trauma? She asked. Didn't choose it, I was good at it, and I hated waiting. Waiting for pages of tests to come back while someone bled out. In trauma, you move. You decide, you take the risk. She considered that. Your species is unusually comfortable with uncertainty. We've had practice. They parted ways near the central lift. Lorne returned to his quarters, which were barely the size of a broom closet and smelled faintly of sterilized algae. He collapsed onto the sleep pad without changing clothes and was unconscious in seconds. The next cycle began with a message. Request for Lorne Sayer. Medical observation team requests presence in simulation lab. He arrived groggy, still chewing a protein wafer, to find a team of Varnaks clustered around a training module. A simulated patient flickered on the table, another thoracic collapse, structurally identical to the real case. One of the Varnaks, a younger one with a pale stripe down its crest, turned to him. We tried your pressure technique. The model stabilizes, but we can't maintain tension during sealing. Lorne stepped forward. Show me what you're doing. They replayed the sequence. The pressure clicked into place, held for a moment, then buckled during resin application. You're applying the sealant too soon. You need a second stabilizer to hold position while the first sets, like a surgical scaffold. The young Varnak hesitated. We don't have an extra stabilizer. Then use one of the tissue retractors and modify the tip. That's not a stabilizer. Doesn't have to be. Just needs to hold. Watch. He took the retractor, bent the tip slightly, and inserted it alongside the main brace. It held steady as the sealant hardened. The simulation completed, no collapse. The young Varnak's pulse nodes glowed faintly. You adapted the tool mid-procedure? Yeah, that's the job. They ran the simulation 3 more times, each successful. Afterward, the Varnak stood in a loose semicircle around him. You've altered our approach to thoracic injuries, one said. Not just in technique, in mindset. Lorne shrugged. You already had the tools. You just needed permission to break the rules. The young one asked, Will you return home soon? Eventually. Will others come like you? Lorne looked around the lab. Alien faces. Familiar instruments made unfamiliar. 1,000 variables he hadn't learned yet. Maybe, he said, but you won't need them. They watched him leave. No applause, no ceremony, just quiet understanding. The simulation lab smelled faintly of ionized copper and something like roasted melon. Lorne stood at the side console, arms crossed, watching the 4th attempt. The Varnak trainees had nearly mastered the staggered pressure technique, but their tool handling was still clumsy. The synthetic chest cavity bulged unnaturally on the left, a clear sign the stabilizer had been rotated mid-line. Stop there, he said, tapping the pause glyph. The projection froze. One of the younger Varnaks, pale-skinned with a line of amber markings across its upper crest, stepped back from the table, appendages curled slightly inward. You twisted the brace when you anchored the second segment, Lorne said. You're applying torque where you need linear compression. I tried to match the internal curve, the trainee replied. That's your first mistake. Bones don't care about matching lines, they care about force vectors. You're not sculpting, you're counterbalancing. He walked over, pulled the brace from the model manually, and reinserted it with a short twist of his wrist. The synthetic tissue flexed, then settled. The cavity held. See that, Lorne said? It's not about mimicking the shape, it's about neutralizing the tension. The Varnak's pulse lines flickered with acknowledgement. A slender figure entered the lab, a different species, tall and spindly, with translucent plates running along its spine. It moved with a deliberate grace, each step measured but not hesitant. I observed your instructional sequences, it said. You are using physical intuition to override predictive models. You're welcome to call it that, Lorne replied, wiping his hands on a cloth square that dissolved into mist. But yes, sometimes you have to feel your way through. The newcomer tilted its head. I am Trell. I moderate procedural compliance for the station's clinical protocols. Your deviation from established methods concerns several departments. Let me guess, someone's upset I didn't ask before modifying a food polymer into a thoracic brace? That is one of the concerns. Lorne leaned back against the table. Fine, let's talk about it. You want to improve protocol compliance? Start by making protocols that account for variable anatomy. Your models assume symmetry and consistency. I've seen 3 Varnaks in the last week with different thoracic membranes. One had bifurcated struts. How do you account for that? We do not, Trell admitted. Such anomalies are filtered as statistical noise. They're not noise, they're patients. If your models can't handle edge cases, they're not medical, they're engineering exercises. Trell didn't respond immediately. The room remained still except for the faint hum of the simulation table. You believe your methods are universally applicable. I don't believe anything blindly. I test it. If it works, I use it. If it doesn't, I throw it out. The Varnak trainee stepped forward again. May I try the correction again? Lorne gestured to the table. Go ahead. This time, anchor the lateral edge first and pivot into position. Feel the tension shift as you go. The trainee moved carefully, repositioning the brace in a slow, deliberate arc. The cavity adjusted gradually. No bulge formed. Good, Lorne said. Hold that. Now apply the resin with a single pass. Don't stop once you start. The adhesive formed a seamless seal. The simulation completed with no structural failure. Trell observed silently, then walked once around the table. You are creating procedural templates based on tactile perception. That is not easily translatable. Maybe not, but you've got species here that use echolocation and pheromonal signaling. If they can learn to feel tension through gloves, you can learn to simulate it. Trell considered this. Would you be willing to assist in codifying these adaptations into new procedural frameworks? I'll write what I can, but you'll need to let the trainees practice it in real time. You can't learn this from diagrams. Trell gave a small motion of assent, then turned and exited without another word. Lorne exhaled and looked back to the Varnak trainee. Careful? Well, Carol, you're going to lead the next round. You've got the touch. Teach the others how to find it. Later that rotation, Lorne made his way to the station's botanical dome, not for the foliage, which looked like a mixture of coral and rubberized seaweed, but because it was the only place on Mirai Station where the airflow didn't reek of sterilization gas and recycled protein vapor. He sat on a curved bench beneath a spiraled plant that emitted a calming hum, sipping from a pouch of thick, salty broth that passed for soup. Ren appeared without preamble, visor flickering with pale orange readouts. Your simulation metrics have been uploaded to the Interspecies Medical Archive. Good for them, Lorne muttered. Still doesn't mean anyone's going to use them. You are incorrect. The Varnak delegation has already requested adaptation of the staggered pressure method into their primary curriculum. Lorne paused, mid-sip. You're serious? They have also requested that you be listed as origin point for the protocol. He chuckled once. Great. That's going to make the next staff meeting awkward. There will be no meeting. Your rotation ends tomorrow. The words hit like a dropped scalpel. Lorne lowered the pouch. That soon? You have completed your agreed term. Unless you intend to extend? He leaned back against the bench, staring upward at the slow swirl of the dome's artificial sky. Nah, I was supposed to be gone last cycle, remember? I stayed because they needed hands. Hin's visor adjusted tone. You were not obligated to correct our methods. You did not benefit from doing so. Well, maybe I did, Lorne said. You ever see a Varnak chest cavity realign itself cleanly without an internal rupture? I had neither. Now I have. You are a statistical outlier. Yeah, Lorne said. We all are. That's what makes this job interesting. He stood, stretching his shoulders, and glanced back toward the medbay level, visible through the dome's upper windows. Below, he could see movement in Varnaks and others, practicing, adjusting, learning. You'll be all right, he said. You've got Karil. He has requested additional instruction, Haren said. Good, he'll make a better teacher than I ever was. Lorne left the dome and returned to his quarters. He packed slowly, not because he was sentimental, but because the station's gravity made folding clothes feel like a chore. As he sealed the last bag, a message blinked on the wall screen. Departure shuttle confirmed. Human Medical Officer Lorne Sayer scheduled for return transit. He tapped the acknowledgement. As the shuttle detached from Mirai Station, Lorne looked back once through the viewport. The station hung in low orbit above a pale teal planet, its docking arms extended like a reaching hand. A synthetic voice asked if he required refreshment. "No," he said, leaning back in the chair. "I've fixed enough for one cycle." And for the first time in weeks, he closed his eyes and slept, without dreaming of broken scaffolds or pooling fluids. Everything that needed fixing had been fixed, everything that needed teaching had been taught, and just this once, that was enough.